Doei. Yeah.
So I see some people started joining. Lots of familiar names, which is always nice to see. Wanted to just do, in typical webinar form, a bit of an icebreaker to stimulate some participation from people that have just joined, and ask people to drop into the chat their favorite guilty pleasure snack. I feel like I personally have far too many to mention. But yeah, let me know what yours is.
But what is yours, Jude? I would like to know one of them at least.
Nachos, basically anything eaten directly out of the fridge at 11 o'clock at night.
When the first thing, I don't really have a sweet tooth, but the first thing that came to my mind when I had to reflect on it was a Cinnabon.
Oh yeah, I feel like it's very American.
No, London is the association I have. Piccadilly Circus. There was a shop on the corner right there.
I know that one.
Yeah,
I know that one. Yeah, what else? Cheese. Probably mostly savory stuff for me. I'll wait for another minute and then we can get started. But I'm really excited to be able to have this conversation today, and personally feel like the motherhood transition piece is not really that talked about in the workplace. I think it's often minimized or downplayed. So in typical Uncommon style, we really want to drive those uncommon conversations and to really try and remove any taboo or stigma around it. So really excited to have Sue with us to do exactly that.
I am very excited to be here. When Yolanda asked me, I thought to myself, I only have one child and this is only year one, so I don't really have that much experience. If anything, I think perhaps a bit further down the line, but happy to share from the past year and not claiming to be an expert. So also very, very curious to hear other people's experience.
Yeah, we'd really love to invite people to chime in with not just questions, but sharing any of their experiences, challenges. Also, we want to touch a bit on the maternal optimism. So thinking about the positives of becoming a mother. I think often, especially when you think about working motherhood, it's a lot of scheduling and planning and juggling, but to also celebrate some of the positive as well. Okay, we have just enabled the chat function. So anyone wants to share their guilty pleasure snacks or even pregnancy cravings that maybe they had, please feel free to drop it in. But I will get started since we just gone past 5 past. So for those of you that don't know, I'm Jude and I head up growth at Uncommon. So we're a private network for female leaders, and it's our goal to drive the uncommon and the candid conversations and to provide resources that enable our members to accelerate, not just in their professional lives, but every area of their life. I'm originally from the UK, but have lived in Singapore for 4 years. And last year I was part of the COVID baby boom and became a mum for the first time. My daughter Frida is 18 months old and she was up partying all night. So please forgive any sleep deprivation induced stumbles on my part. So this topic, navigating transitions, specifically working with motherhood, is something that I'm really excited to be able to talk to Sue about today. So some of you might be familiar with Sue already. She's in a regional lead role at Meta, looking after the Philippines and Malaysia. And as she said, she's a mum of 1. Outside of work, she is also one of our Uncommon members, an avid dancer, and loves a K-drama. So Sue, thank you for joining us. I'd love for you to do your own intro and share a bit about yourself.
Thank you so much, Jude, and thanks to everyone who's able to join today. So a bit about myself. I'm Dutch. I'm originally from the island of Curaçao in the Caribbean, a previous colony to the Netherlands, and I grew up in Amsterdam. So when people ask me, where am I really from? I spent probably the last 10 years away from the Netherlands now. Now. I'm a typical middle child, one of three, raised by two very strong women, my mom and my grandmother. And I think from a very, very young age, already had a very clear view of what I wanted to do in life in terms of becoming a leader. I started my career in HR and then I pivoted to sales leadership many years after. And about 3 years ago, exactly, actually, I think yesterday was exactly 3 years ago in Singapore. So just before the pandemic, I got to Singapore from Dublin, where I was before. And I've enjoyed the experience, though it's meant that my pregnancy was partially in lockdown, partially out of that. And my daughter will be one. My daughter Logan, her birthday is on Saturday. She's currently down with hand, foot, mouth disease. Not quite the plan I had for myself starting this week, but I think it just really shows the topic that we're on, which is, I think as you navigate and become a working parent, like there is no plan that's linear that you can follow. So I'm very excited to have this conversation, but also to talk about things from a very vulnerable place, like raw and the stuff that I guess there's the before and then there's the reality. And I'm particularly excited or actually passionate to talk about this. Can you have it all?
Thank you, Sue. So to the people that have joined us today, just wanted to reiterate whether you're feeling lost and like you need some direction, although don't know if we're best poised to give that advice or even just the opportunity to share your own experience, to connect with other mums. We hope you take something away from the conversation today. So before we get started, housekeeping. If you have any specific questions for Sue or I, just drop them into the Q&A chat. I think everyone's familiar with this after so long of Zooming. We'll get to the questions at the end. And if there's anything from the conversation today that resonates with you, we're really happy to hear it and would love if you share on social media. You can tag us on Instagram at Hey Uncommon or on LinkedIn at This Is Uncommon. And if you miss out on any important parts from the webinar, don't worry, we'll send a recording afterwards and we'll also share a summary of some of the resources and research that we found really interesting and that we'll be discussing a little bit today. So before we get into the conversation, I wanted to share a little bit about what sparked the idea for this webinar. So I've had the privilege to interview hundreds of women in my role at Uncommon and really love asking people about their goals and their challenges. And a reoccurring topic that always comes up is, how do I navigate change? So change can obviously take many, many forms. So career change, loss, relocating to a new place, and of course, having a child is a huge one of these. So like any other big milestone, motherhood is a huge change that can rock, I think, every fiber of your being. And whilst it is definitely exciting and joyful, and there are good days and bad days and strange days and sleep deprived days, there's also a lot about motherhood that I think we shy away from talking about. And until recently, I think there is a real lack of vocabulary and terminology to even be able to articulate it. So with that, I wanted to start by sharing this short clip of a TED Talk that talks about exactly this, the concept of matrescence. Oh, bear with me 1 second.
In the medical textbooks, because doctors mostly write about disease. So I turned to anthropology. And it took me 2 years, but in an out-of-print essay written in 1973 by Dana Raphael, I finally found a helpful way to frame this conversation. Matrescence. It's not a coincidence that matrescence sounds like adolescence. Both are times when body morphing and hormone shifting lead to an upheaval in how a person feels emotionally and how they fit into the world. And like adolescence, matrescence is not a disease. But so I set out to learn more.
So the concept of matrescence is talking about this all-encompassing, irreversible shift, much like when you are shifting in adolescence from being a child to an adult. So hormonal, physical, physiological, social, everything. And I think it's a really interesting and useful and probably underused term. So Sue, would love to turn to you and to ask how this concept resonates with you.
Up until you brought it up, I didn't actually realize there was a word for this, but obviously you have undergone it. And I think, like, if I backtrack and look at the piece, like, you become pregnant, you tell the world, everyone celebrates, then the baby shower and whatnot. But then there's really nothing from the moment the baby is born and the bit that happens after, which, if you ask me, emotionally was the most challenging thing. And it was only when I found myself in it that I realized there's such a thing as the fourth trimester. So it's helpful to know there's such a word that describes all of it. I think for me, like, when Logan was born, the first thing that I felt was, I don't feel like a mommy straight away, but I also don't think that I'm depressed and that I actually have postpartum depression, but no language for it. But the things that I struggled with most, probably not feeling like I'm good at what I'm doing, that I know what I'm doing, struggled with the shifts in my body hormonally, but just physically seeing how my body was after Logan was born. So I really, really connect, and I'm actually grateful that you're sharing this with us today, because I think it'd be so helpful for so many to know that you're not actually going crazy and it's perfectly normal, and to just validate the feelings that you're experiencing, because I certainly felt that. And over time, it's nearly a year now, I think it's just set in, and somehow the shift just sort of materialized, where this new identity of a mom, in addition to all the other identities I already had, it became more normal, as with any transition that you navigate.
And something that we will come on to more, that you just touched on here, that I think is so massive, is this void between expectation and reality. So much of your pregnancy is about the pregnancy and about the birth, and then so little talked about everything that happens after that. And actually the birth is, such a tiny part. And I think so much of the challenge for so many people I speak to is this navigating this gap between the ease at which you thought you would slide into this. I think especially if you have had a successful career trajectory, if you're more senior and used to kind of managing everything and being very structured, it can be particularly challenging. Perhaps you can share a bit more about tips that you might have, or things that you wish you'd known before that might have impacted how you would have navigated this change.
Definitely would have loved to know more about the fourth trimester. I'll give, so first of all, just so you learn a little bit more about me, I've definitely now, when I was pregnant, reading all the books about what to expect and whatnot, because I thought that would be setting myself up for failure, because all those books, while they are great, they don't know my baby in my particular case. So I didn't actually spend time on this kind of books, at least not a lot. Also, I was studying, so I was just prioritizing other books, if you will. But I think it would have been helpful to know more about the fourth trimester, and just figuring out that sort of emotional component that happens after. The fact that this sort of transition, it will take some time, and this need for control that indeed, as you're more established in your career, you're so used to having. But quite frankly, when you become a mom, both you and the baby, once a stranger in your body, have been hired to do a job you're essentially unqualified for, at least initially. And you're trying to get to know each other, and as a result, you build your confidence and you become better at it. I wish I'd known also a little bit more when it comes to breastfeeding. I suffered from mastitis, which was just the most horrible thing I ever experienced. I wasn't really clued up on it. And somehow I just wished I had more of a community of those who had gone before me to share what their experience had been. And my experience was that people would only share and show up how everything was perfect. Oh, my baby's sleeping through the night. And I'm like, I barely managed to shower some days. Like how is it that you're in full makeup in front of me? So I just had wished that there was more vulnerability in people wanting to share their experience of having become a mom and the shifts that occurred after that.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. My becoming a mother and this transitional thinking about matrescence, I feel I had this double layer in that my mum died shortly after I became a mum. So I had this really interesting paradox of navigating becoming a mother whilst losing my own mother. And in a weird way, I think often people speak of that change of losing a parent and how that can really change, like completely reorientate and shift you. And I think from my experience, it definitely did. But then in a way, I found it very anchoring that I had become a mother, and that there'd been this short window where with the long distance, we'd virtually overlapped, that I'd shared with my mum, but then found such solace in a way in those moments of mothering. But definitely feel like that fourth trimester for me, I changed in ways that I never would have anticipated with both of those experiences.
Thanks for sharing that, Jude. I'm really sorry to hear that. I didn't actually know that. Thanks for sharing that.
No, I mean, I think it's the first time I've managed to talk about it without becoming an emotional wreck. But
which would have been totally okay, by the way. That's pretty significant.
The internet doesn't need my ugly crying, but I appreciate the safe space. We're definitely all about that. So something else that I think is quite top of mind, especially for lots of women that have a career and really enjoy their career, is the idea of how do you navigate keeping both? A bit about this, the term of having it all, which I think is a bit daunting or undermining to the reality of things. But I know we spoke earlier about this middle sprint, it's often termed, or the 10-year sprint. And this is the idea that even from the very beginning of their working careers, women know that there is this pressure to get to a certain point in her career, to have a certain level of being established in terms of their salary, their job title, their position, their network, before they can have a child. So I think in Singapore, the median age for having a baby is 30, but more and more women are giving birth in their 40s. So I think this middle sprint comes with different pressures for women more advanced in their career. So how do you juggle increased pressures in the workplace and then this huge shakeup in your personal life? So I feel like you fall a little bit into this category, myself too, to some extent. So would love to know a bit about how you chose between career and kids and what this looked like for you.
Yeah, so arriving, I just turned 38, and arriving at my gynecologist for the first sort of set of tests, I learned that I'm a geriatric mom. Well, English is not my first language, so I had to look up what that word meant. And I was like, that's so offensive. Thank you very much, lady. So yeah, an older mom. And and then societal, because my roots are from the Caribbean. Though my mom never asked, like, hey, what's your plan and whatnot, it was quite clear there was something there that wasn't being said. And after I had a baby, it was shared with me, which is, we all thought you were just not really interested in becoming your mom because your career is so important to you. So for many years, I wasn't actually entirely clear whether I wanted to become a mom. Definitely sort of throughout my 20s, even early 30s, I wasn't too sure. So that's like the first thing. But then when I started feeling in my body, like, actually, I think our life is meaningful, but I can definitely see how our life would be enriched if we welcome like a little person. But then kept delaying. We moved from Amsterdam to London. London was only going to be for 2 years, but then that got extended to 5 years, was a lucrative expat contract, a great opportunity, really sort of launched that to my career. Then after that, so it's like, okay, now's not the time. This is exciting, sort of partying and enjoying time in London. Then the second phase of it was, there's this other opportunity for you to move to Dublin. And we have such a great opportunity for you to sort of like step into this other role. I'm like, yeah, now's definitely not the time. I mean, we're moving countries. This is definitely not ideal. And then a third time moving from Ireland to Singapore. And quite frankly, we were doing long distance, so it would have been a little bit more difficult for the little person to come into existence in the first place. But then eventually, after moving to Singapore, my husband and I started having a conversation about like, do we actually want to have a child? Because we've postponed and delayed like again and again for like great career opportunity and whatnot. And I remember a conversation I had with a really close friend and I asked her, and she's a very accomplished business leader, but how do you know if you really want to have a baby? And she said to me, just in such a like with conviction, you will just know. And I think like post-pandemic, during the pandemic, sort of that started bubbling up. We spent so much more time together, but also that I really had time to sort of sit with what do I really want? And then it just came to me that I just felt it in my body, in my heart, that I really want to become a mom. So yes, I've definitely delayed it. Part of it was also a lack of clarity, whether that was truly a desire that I had in my heart. But definitely it could have happened 5 years earlier if it hadn't been for another opportunity and whatnot. And then also the fear of how am I going to juggle it? And what does this mean for my career? Because I know for a fact that because I went on mat leave, now coming back from mat leave, there's going to have to be another runway of me delivering stuff before I get onto the promo track. So it's absolutely true that I think there's a sacrifice you make. But I also think what is true, and this is holding a paradox, which is if it is something that you feel in your heart that you would like to, then so far it has been a worthwhile sacrifice. But I'll be very honest, it really sucks to know that when I went out on mat leave, then actually those of a different gender who don't have a womb got promoted, not from a place of jealousy, but just from a place of, I know from a capability and what I've delivered that I also could have been in that place. So both of those things are equally true. I love that I've become a mom and that I've been able to. I also want to take a moment to spend time saying that I know that there's so many people who want to become moms and it's not an option for them. So I don't take it lightly. So yeah, that's been my personal story around the struggle and sort of the middle sprint and delaying.
Thanks for sharing that. I think what you were saying about the sacrifice you make for stepping out of the workplace is really interesting, and it's something that I've been thinking quite a lot about, especially in Singapore, where your maternity leave is relatively short. So I think the government stipulation is 4 months, so that's like 16 weeks. I know other companies might extend this a little bit, but for me, there's a big piece here around just what's normalized in society. And because it's an experience of women, it's not normalized. So when you draw the comparison to national service or resurface, so many men will leave the workforce for 3 or 4 weeks a year, every year, to do resurface. And because this is normalized, it's not problematic at all. But over the course of a career, this equates to being, easily a couple of maternity leaves. So there isn't really, it's not treated in the same way. So for me, the more I'd thought about this motherhood bias or mothering bias, the more I concluded a lot of it is about what's normalized and how can we start making these small shifts to normalize the experiences of women as being the experiences of leaders and not the other.
I brought that you brought in that example of national service because I hadn't even thought about it. But yes, it's absolutely true. Someone on my team comes, oh, by the way, FYI, I'll be out there. And it's like, okay.
Yeah, and it could be several weeks and it could be a crunch stage to the business and you just plan and have to make do around it.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I was lucky enough that Meta provides 6 months of mat leave, which is an additional 2. But equally, Netherlands is also 4 months. So I was very lucky to have a very generous maternity leave. And I noticed that particularly when I was connecting with other moms who were going back after 3 months, like, gosh, I feel like after 3 months, I barely caught my breath. Like I wouldn't have felt ready, also not physically. So, yeah.
So something that we touched on at the very beginning, the the thoughts of doing it all, having it all, what that really means. So to me, I feel like this is something that we've inherited from maybe the 80s, the 90s, when women started really entering the workforce at scale in kind of office jobs, taking more roles that, well, this shift from being stay-at-home mothers. And there was this real idea that you can have it all, and this real feminist belief that you can balance everything, juggle everything. I think this is starting to shift, and people are now beginning to recognize that having it all really means that you're doing it all, and it means that you're picking up the brunt of things at home. You're juggling everything then also at work. So as a woman that completed a world-class MBA program when you had just become a mother, and a woman that has often received this intended compliment of being a superwoman and doing it all, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, the superwoman thing, like, the first thing that I say is like, look, I'm really not superwoman. And I think from social media, and I know I work in a social media company, people can assume based on how things look that it's easy. So if I take the example of completing the degree at INSEAD and then returning to work, new mom, all of that kind of jumbling up, coming together, just to clarify, I did not actually intend to become a mom and take on a degree at the same time. COVID happened, timelines shifted, and ta-da, life happens when you're busy making other plans. Anyway, so with all of that sort of jumbling up and happening, time and time again, people would say to me, oh my God, you're such a superwoman and whatnot. And I'd always have to take a moment and correct and say, like, look, there is a price and there is a cost to pay for doing this. So in my particular case, I was away from Logan a lot, away from my husband a lot. It was so much so that when I saw Logan, she just automatically started waving at me, which was so incredibly devastating. As I say it now, I actually get goosebumps. And I was so upset because I'm like, I know I'm setting an example for her, but in my heart, it like so sucks that my kid associates me with leaving. And then people saying to my husband, oh my God, you're such a great father. And I'm like, this kid has two parents. What are you on about? So it's hard. There's a price to pay. And I think for each individual, you kind of have to work out, like, what are the sacrifices that you are prepared to make? Because the word priority in itself assumes that one thing is more important before the other thing can come, which means that you can't do two things really, really well together. One, you're going to be sometimes a better mom and a not so great employee, or the other way around. And that's just constant. And the other thing that I'll bring into this, in this having it all, doing it all, is the social contract that you have with your partner. Because in order for me to be able to do what I was able to do, and I graduated in September, I wouldn't have been able to do it if it wasn't for an open conversation with my husband about how we're going to make all of this work. And then the fact that we are in Singapore means that we get to have a helper / nanny, which in the Netherlands isn't something that would have been very common. So yes, I managed to graduate, return to work, back to work and whatnot, but there's definitely a cost of it, which is time away from my husband and the impact that that has on our relationship, and the initial phase of being able to bond with Logan and the fact that she started waving at me.
Yeah, I think what you speak of around social media, again, ladders back to this expectation versus reality. And Jenny, one of our Uncommon members, who I know she has 2 small children, and just put a comment in the chat that I think is so apt, that maybe you can have it all, but just not all at the same time.
Oh, yes, I agree.
Yeah. There's a book called Fair Play by Eva Rodsky that I really couldn't recommend more highly, but she was in a dual career household, but recognized she was carrying all of the unpaid, unrecognized domestic burdens. And yeah, through her frustrations, ended up wanting to catalog and log this to really see what the data looked like. After a few months, she had this mammoth spreadsheet with 92 tabs and 2,000 tasks in it, and it totally blew up and went viral. And she had so many other women reach out to her, relate to this, and without a solution, so just kind of spotlighting the problem, the conclusion for lots of women were, I don't want to be in this situation. I want to break, I want to divorce my partner. And then through this, she realized, okay, there needs to be a solution to this problem, and then developed a whole framework around fair play and how you can sit down and redistribute and have like very frank conversations about how to manage that. And her point is that if women are doing it all at home, they can't go out into the world and do it all in the workplace as well. And I know we speak of a very privileged section of motherhood and transition, but I think it's very relatable for lots of people. And yeah, coming down to the priorities and thinking about what balls you drop at different times.
Yeah, and someone gave me and I like this analogy, which was like, is it a glass bowl or is it not a glass bowl? Because there's so many different things you have on your plate. And look, if the daycare sends a message to say Logan needs to bring an outfit because they're celebrating whatever they're celebrating, and I'm thinking, oh, I really need to go get that outfit or organize it. My husband's like, she's totally fine wearing whatever she's wearing. And I'm like, he's actually right. Why am I driving myself nuts trying to sort out a little cute outfit for that particular occasion, when the reality is that there's going to be another thing she'll celebrate. And then I think someone was talking about define the rubber ball. Well, I think the rubber ball was actually, at the end of the day, work will always like jump up and back, right? And there's different occasions, so it's not as linear, I don't think. There's different moments where you have to define what the rubber ball is. So in this particular example, the rubber ball would be the little outfit that Logan will not wear and she'll be just fine. She'll survive in life. Versus actually, I had a really important client meeting that I needed to show up really well for. And that, say Logan was sick and my husband and I had to contract, actually, this is more important. So I'm going to go. He's going to look after her. And then we switch sort of for the next day. But that rubber ball, I think it continues to be difficult. And if I think about this week, hand, foot, mouth disease, and we're having a discussion, who's taking her to the doctor yesterday and looking at calendars, it's hard. Like, it really is. And I think it's going to be an ever ongoing journey of hardness.
Yeah, I think it's interesting what you say about contracting between yourselves. I know that this is a ball in itself that I think my household often drops, that communication and organization, that then it often feels like it's a bit of a scramble, which then makes it all seem so much more chaotic. Something else that I wanted to really build on and to talk a little bit about that I found so fascinating was around the myths of motherhood. So there's an amazing book, The Mother Brain by Chelsea Conboy, and she here is digging into the neuroscience of what actually happens to the brain when you become a parent. So we're fed a lot of myths about motherhood. So we're taught that maternal instinct is innately maternal, womanly and natural. And there's so many images that just constantly reinforce this. So I think social media is also a big proponent of this. And there's also this swirl of emotions and perceived joy around motherhood, that the image of becoming a mum is effortless and you innately can satisfy your baby's every needs, and that breastfeeding is best, and that vaginal births are superior. And yeah, all of these messages that really add to this pressure and expectation that you have. What Candice Conboy's book does that's really interesting is then start to look at how the brain actually behaves. And what she discovers is there are major shifts driven by hormones and just the influx of stimuli that you have from being with a baby. But these shifts aren't exclusive to mothers. They also happen for any primary caregiver. So just having extended periods of time that you spend with your baby is the catalyst to the brain changing irreversibly. So I think it's really interesting because I definitely felt it really challenged my perception of the role of a mother and the expectation of being a mother. And I wanted to share a fun clip from Ali Wong's stand-up that really builds on this expectation versus reality. She's talking about breastfeeding. Oh, one moment, just need to activate the sound.
Feel like is brutal. It is chronic physical torture. I thought it was supposed to be this beautiful bonding ceremony where I would feel like I was sitting on a lily pad in a meadow and bunnies would gather at my feet while the fat Hawaiian man version of Somewhere Over the Rainbow would play. No! It's not like that at all. Breastfeeding is this savage ritual that just reminds you that your body is a cafeteria now. Breastfeed.
That is hilarious.
Yeah, right. So your thoughts on this? What surprised you about?
Maybe I should have watched that beforehand, so I wouldn't be so. That yeah. Actually, you know what? I talked about mastitis earlier. I didn't even know there was such a thing. So my prep with regards to breastfeeding probably wasn't the best. And there's an element of it which can be very enjoyable in due course, where you do have I don't know that the bunnies are going to show up at your feet, but that you can have a quiet, nice, really nice moment that you're fully present and make eye contact. But for the first part of it, at least 6 weeks, if not longer, depending on different people's journey, it's just awful. My experience of it was just awful. And my mom, and I think this can be very, very similar to perhaps Asian moms, my mom said to me, that was her advice, don't be weak. So great, mom, so empathetic, so much compassion. But the first part of it was just really, really hard. And I think in the end, Logan weaned herself off and I breastfed exclusively for 6 months and then a bit of formula. And by 8 months, she was like, I've had enough. So in the end, my experience with breastfeeding has been positive. But yeah, there is an element where I'm like, oh, now all my outfits, I need to be thinking about what's the easiest way for my boob to be exposed. And you're just like aware that you're constantly someone's food. It's not a very attractive phase in life, but it also doesn't last forever. So yeah. Again, a paradox and so many mixed emotions. I have loved to be able to breastfeed Logan and that it was a possibility for me. I also never imagined that I would become this obsessed person who, if we're driving and she starts crying and be like, stop the car, I need to feed Logan. And my husband's like, we can continue for a while. I'm like, no, stop now. So I never imagined in a million years that I would be so obsessed with, I want to breastfeed. But this is also hormones. And I realized when I stopped breastfeeding and it was all out, that I was like, oh, this is great. Other people can feed her. I can just have a lie-in. So yeah, it's such a complex and nuanced journey.
Any other myths that you think actually tripped you up or kind of do women a disservice about motherhood?
Well, I guess the whole I do think there's an element of multitasking or just where you get so much more effective with your time. I do think I noticed that if we talk about me at work and how motherhood has impacted me, I have no time for bullshit. I'm like, can this be an email? If so, please let it be an email. We do not have to meet. Whereas before I probably didn't have that as much, but no, there's not one other one that comes to mind at the minute. I think the main one is sort of if my husband is with Logan, the sort of responses that he gets versus like there's no such thing for moms, right? You're just expected to do it. And I guess comments from older generations around, oh, but are you, this is very much in the Netherlands the case, everyone asking, so are you now going to work part-time? Because most women in the Netherlands will work 4 days once they've had a baby. And I'm like, no, I don't want to work 4 days. I don't want to receive 4 days pay for 5 days work. No. And then there's like an awkward silence. So yeah, but that's from the lens and perspective from the Netherlands and the expectations that when you become a mom, you should go to part-time work. That I haven't seen any of this in Singapore.
Yeah, I think Singapore has quite a unique setup that there is such affordable live-in help. So I think Singapore's obviously set itself up to have, a whole nation of dual income households. And I think the expectations on mothers versus on fathers, like you said earlier, Logan has 2 parents. But I can't imagine your partner had many questions about whether he was going back to work full time or part time.
Yeah, no, I don't. Actually, I think Remco is on the line, but no, I don't think that was true as much. It's a very societal thing.
Anything that you would want to unlearn about becoming a mum? So things, kind of narratives or stories you were fed before you became a mum?
I think the biggest one, which will continue to be a gripe, is perfectionism and just wanting to like get everything perfect. And like Logan turns 1 on Saturday. Originally, we organized a party for her. And I realized once we had to shift this party because of her hand, foot, mouth disease, that I'd gone crazy with the personalized balloon and 2 cakes. One is for smash experience. The other one is for eating. I think just this notion of having to be a perfect mom, which I think a lot of people struggle with. And the narrative that I want to go by, which is something that my friend Jasmine shared, is from INSEAD, is to be a good enough parent, that you're empathetic, you can validate your child's experience, whatever they're going through, and they could be different sorts of tantrums, some for legit reasons, others not so much. But that you're able to hold space and be a container for your child in that moment, cuddle them when they need to eat, feed them. But all that extra stuff is truly, well and truly, I think, what society perhaps has put on us in terms of having to be a perfect mom. And most recently, I had this experience where I had my first business trip. The first 2, Logan came along, and as did our helper, Marlene. But then I was like, there's never going to be a good time. At some point, I'll have to go on a business trip by myself without Logan. And so I had gone away for the full week. The first part of it was really hard, leaving when she was still asleep, not being able to say goodbye. But I think, as with anything that's a first, there was always going to be an element of real sadness and struggle that went with it. As the week went along, I was like in my zone, meeting with clients, speaking publicly was all fine. But then I realized overcompensation. I'd returned from this trip on Friday, and I was like, right, on Saturday morning when I pick her up from her crib, we're going to do something fun. And I like looked up this indoor play thing in the East in Singapore, and they open at 9. And I'm like, I'm there at 9:05. So I was there at 9:05. And this auntie looks at me and she goes, oh, we're closed for the morning. I'm like, excuse me? That's not on your website. And I was like, literally, I was having the tantrum and the meltdown. But what it was really about is feeling this guilt that I'd been away the whole week and wanting to overcompensate and making up. And my friend Constance actually shared about a book she was reading on this. And then the lady's like, oh, I'll give her a balloon. She gave Logan a balloon. Logan was like, this is the best thing ever, playing with that balloon. And quite frankly, I took myself and Logan to a coffee shop. I had a coffee. She played with her balloon, and she was the happiest kid ever. But that's self-inflicted. I now must be a perfect mom because it's the weekend and I've been away for 5 days. That perhaps I think is something that I don't know that I had expected that to be an experience I would have, but definitely have experienced it.
Yeah, I think this is pretty unanimous. And I definitely also hear it from fathers, but I suspect there's more of a stigma about voicing that guilt that you maybe have. And yeah, perhaps these maternal motherhood myths just really instill a stronger expectation within women. Perhaps this is a good point to, I'd love to throw a question open to our participants and to just ask really, really simple, for those of you, any stage you are in your motherhood experience, whether you are a mum, you know you don't want to be a mum, you're pregnant, or you're a new mum, would love to know how you would describe motherhood in one word. So if you had to describe motherhood in one word, what would that be? And I think for me, it would be chaotic.
Yes, absolute chaos. But somehow it all works out.
Yeah, I mean, beautiful chaos, but if I can only have one word, it would be chaos, not beautiful.
Yeah. I don't know that I can think of a different word, because I think chaos, it really represents it very well.
Someone's posted anxiety.
Yeah. Okay, maybe it's not one word, but I will say letting go. Because this having a plan, it doesn't work. Your kid will just completely mess up your plan. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, case in point, hand, foot, and mouth in this big birthday bash.
Which is no longer taking place this weekend, but it's okay. Logan doesn't know she's having a party anyway.
Yeah, I mean, half of this stuff is for the parents anyway, I guess.
I like that conundrum. That really resonates.
Tough but growth. Yeah,
yes.
Conundrum, learning. Yeah, Milda, I know we've spoken about this before, that, yeah, I mean, your words being a control freak, but I'd say hyper-organized person. Obviously, having a baby throws all of that completely under the bus. Kate sharing grounded. Yeah, nothing more real than having a baby vomit all over you.
Oh yeah. Keeps you humble. Keeps you humble.
Keeps you so humble. Flexibility, yeah.
Yeah, grounded.
But messy.
I like that groundedness. I remember someone said to me, look, at work, you can be replaced every day of the week. You cannot be replaced as Logan's mom ever. And I just thought that was such sound advice, that whenever I'm having a tough moment, I actually do think back to it. And it does ground me.
Yeah, very powerful. And we haven't really touched on it here, but I do recognize and try and appreciate daily how much of a privilege it is to be a parent, and that, yeah, lots of people have very complicated journeys to get there, or are unable to get there. So I think that also really helps me in the more challenging moments to step back and have that perspective. Yeah, it does take
a village. Absolutely. And I guess one thing I've gotten better at is asking for help. After I wrapped up INSEAD, I was just so exhausted. And since I wasn't breastfeeding anymore, I just had to ask my husband and say, look, I'm not going to be involved in anything to do with Logan in the morning anymore. You can just take care of that. But actually, it wasn't just me. It was in therapy where it was like, I needed some form of validation and permission to be able to say, this is what I need right now. And then when we discussed it, I was like, yeah, sure, of course. And it just removed the whole mental load of me thinking that I do have to be involved in that morning process. No, absolutely not.
So we just had a question from Eva come in that I want to come to. It neatly ties to the next thing I wanted to touch on, which is around the stigma of maternity leave, dealing with microaggressions at work around this. You know, slightly passive aggressive comments, jokes about baby brain, which I'm guilty of making at my own expense. I feel like they're so ingrained in one. But I think there's so much research around this. But one thing in particular that I pulled up that I wanted to share was a CNN article that Dr. Rahaj from the NUS Business School shares anecdotes from female employees that delayed the announcements of their pregnancies over being overlooked for promotions and key projects before going on maternity leave. So this is something I can relate to. When I was pregnant, I was working from home because it was COVID, and had put off telling my manager, I think, until I was 7 months pregnant, because I worked in an office where there were no other working mothers. So felt like it was really, I was going to be the outlier, and just immediately kind of bucketed as being a bit of a write-off. Sue, I'd love to know if you had apprehensions around your role in the workplace, transitioning back after maternity leave, and if you think you're still kind of playing catch up. You talked earlier about being not visible and other people then kind of taking front of line for promotions and for other opportunities.
I think this piece around going back to work, I'll actually take a step back, which is going on maternity leave. The difference between when I was going on mat leave, obviously at that point, like full on in the whole cycle that is the world of work, and this real obsession. And again, this is the control of my handover is going to be great. When I'm out, people can just keep going. And like, because you can't quite imagine life with a baby and you haven't had that experience. Then to go through maternity leave and really being confronted with the need to let go of control, and then to reach that point when you're about to re-enter. I was incredibly anxious because I think you spend 24/7 with your baby, and then all of a sudden, I just couldn't imagine like, how is this going to work? And I also couldn't imagine being a stay-at-home mom. So it was a very conflicted sort of set of emotions where I felt upset because, again, I was studying, so I didn't have like 100% just quality time with Logan. There was something else that was happening that was important to me that also stimulated my brain. So I was anxious about, I don't know, how is all of this going to fit in? How am I going to be able to manage with the fatigue? Thankfully, she was sleeping through the night when I went back to work. She was nearly 7 months. And then I guess my biggest concern was I had a new manager and we hadn't yet established rapport because that manager was confirmed a week before I went on mat leave. So my biggest concern was, how am I going to have this conversation with this stranger about like, I'm a new mom and there's some things that I'm just not willing to do anymore. So for example, my team knows that I leave on time so I can go and pick up on some days, go and pick up Logan from daycare. Then there's bath time, food, whatnot. And I will just be unavailable when that's happening. And I've worked out that unavailability needs to be a hard sort of boundary, not fluid. And that's one that I hold as much as I can, but also I had to find the courage to sort of say, this is what works for me now, and to find a way to share what my needs are. But it was difficult because the manager and I were new to each other. Now, thankfully, I have a really great manager who's very empathetic and compassionate. But the stories I was making in my head before I had this conversation, I was like, oh, he's a single man. He doesn't have a family. He works a lot. Is he going to? And then I just created this stuff in my head, which was a lot of it was self-inflicted about, oh, but he's not going to think I'm committed because if I'm out the door at 5, that just seems like I'm not committed. And then at some point, I just had to say, look, I need to have a conversation with you because every 4 weeks or so, if not a different time frame, Logan picks up some germ from daycare, she's sick, then I'm sick. And then it's so hard to make real progress, to the point that at some point you're like, maybe I'm not going to say I'm sick. I'm just working from home. And then it's all this stuff that you're bubbling up with because you're like, I don't want to say it because I worry about this stigma, which is, oh, the saying, you know what they say, it's best not to have a mom that has young children because that's going to take away efficiency kind of thing. But in my personal case, I found it was incredibly liberating to ask for what I needed and to actually have a conversation very, very vulnerably. And then he said to me, look, I think you're just really beating yourself up. I invest in work. You have all these other areas of your life. So he was able to help me extend some grace to myself as well. But I did worry to some extent. I do believe these worries are legit and that this bias exists no matter in what sort of, amazing company you work in.
Yeah, interesting what you say about the stories that one makes up in one's head. I think we can all relate to that. Moving a little bit, but sticking with work, Eva had asked any views on why more companies, tech companies, don't offer on-site childcare? And have you seen any examples of more family-friendly companies?
Yeah, that's a really good one. Eva, thanks for the question. I'm not really sure why that's the case. I haven't really seen it. Maybe it's a piece around liability. My first career is in HR. Might be a piece around liability if something happens to the kid in daycare. But I honestly don't know. I haven't seen much of it. If I speak to my own experience in new tech, sort of LinkedIn and now Meta, it is a very family-friendly environment in terms of the organization. And if I think about schedules, look, people are interested in the output, not so much like how you do that, etc. So I think that that's been very, very positive. And everywhere you go, you will find nursing rooms that only have so all this stuff is there. I think the thing that is more challenging though is the bias in people's heads. And it doesn't matter how family-friendly the office is. The thoughts that people carry in their minds with pertaining to moms, working parents, they're just there. But Sandrine is sharing Patagonia. Hi, Sandrine. Patagonia is a great example. I do love Patagonia as a company. I don't know what they do, but they're a good example apparently. And she even shares a link about it. But yeah, I think there might be a piece around liability. Carissa, hi Carissa, is saying that it could also be around space. And how do you, and particularly now, if we look at companies, people are working hybrid, then companies are trying to rethink the space that they have and how they use it. And since people are not going to go in anymore, I can't imagine this topic being furthered at this point in time when with a recession and all of this stuff. But yeah, it's a really good question.
Yeah, I mean, I think it probably comes down to a little bit of if most leaders are men and a lot of these leaders, male leaders, have stay-at-home wives, it's not a front of mind priority and it's not seen as a worthwhile investment. But I'm conscious of time and I wanted to end on a positive note. So we'll go a couple of minutes over. Great if you can stay with us. Otherwise, understand if people have to drop off for meetings and stuff. But I just wanted to end on a positive note and talk a bit about maternal optimism. So there is a really great book by Jamie Latch and Dana Greenberg that provides research and lots of stories that talk about how parenting can really enrich careers and enrich the workplace and the business. So both in terms of having a diverse leadership that can also service consumers and better reflect their consumers, but also thinking about you as an individual. And we've talked a lot about early motherhood and this first transition to becoming a mother for the first time, but they talk about how this transition is anything but stagnant. And as your children grow, the problems with your kids grow, and as your career shifts, there are endless unpredictable events. But it's a really positive and great, lots of stories of how women's lives and careers have been enriched. So on that note, I wanted to ask you, Sue, how would you say motherhood has enriched your career?
I think there's a piece around we're getting a visitor, not sweating the small stuff, but also becoming so much more confident. Hello, Liefert. Becoming so much more confident and kind of thinking, oh, before I'd spend like hours preparing for some things. And now I'm like, you know what? I know more than them. I'm just going to rock with this. So I think more confidence, because I'm like being a mom and like the journey that has led to it from when she was born till now is so hard that I feel like doing my job has become easier in comparison. So that piece, for sure, I noticed a knock-on effect in my confidence. Logan says hello.
Yeah, I think very, very nice debut guest appearance from Logan. I can definitely relate to this a little bit. The dropping of perfectionism is actually something that at Uncommon, we're really keen to always be pushing this, striving for excellence, but moving away from this slightly toxic notion of perfectionism that I think is often one's own biggest like limiting belief. So conscious of time, I wanted to ask if anyone had any burning questions in the chat. I think we've kind of covered things as we've gone, but would also love to just give the opportunity if anyone wanted to share anything or to chime in to do so. But otherwise, I will maybe move on to closing. Feel free to still drop comments in if they come this way. But I wanted to just take the opportunity to thank you all for spending your lunch hour with us, for engaging with us, for just being part of this conversation. We're really wanting to have more of these uncommon conversations, and we hope you've taken something away from this. So I will share the link to this recording afterwards, and also share the list of resources that we referenced and talked about.
And Jude, just before you finish, I just want to add one more thing, but I'll let you finish.
And then just wanted to say, for anyone that is less familiar with Uncommon, would love to invite you to find out more, to apply to be part of our community if this is the kind of conversation and like-minded women that you're looking for. And then, let me hand over to you, Sue.
Yeah, so I wanted to just wrap up with a couple of really tangible things as well, which I know would have helped me. So first of all, acknowledge it is difficult and ask for help. There's nothing wrong with that. Feel what you're feeling in the moment after a pregnancy, and then just sit with that and decide which boundaries you will hold that are really, really firm, and then get into a conversation, whether it's at work or with your partner, about that. Keep perspective, because at the end of the day, you are setting an example for your bub on the longer term. Definitely have a laugh, discuss emergency plans, because stuff will go down. And last but most certainly not least, find moms who you actually like, but not because they're moms, because you're like friends and they happen to have babies. And I know for me, it's true that I have those women in my life, and I'm incredibly grateful for them, but also to my husband, who is such a great dad to Logan.
Thanks so much, Sue. Really great advice. I think we will also share that with our wrap up. And for me, it's been such a pleasure to connect with you over this, and have enjoyed so much having this conversation, for you sharing so openly. It's been really great.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it. Thank you so much, Jude. And thank you to everyone who's joined us today. Take care.
Thank you.